Hello and welcome to IDFC First Bank presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 11. You're watching India's longest running television platform for small businesses. I'm Sunanda Jayasheelan, part 3 of our Springboard series here from New Delhi, setting the agenda for what is going to matter the most to you, the entrepreneur. Tonight, two macroeconomic voices. First and foremost, the former ED of the IMF, Surjit Bhalla, also in conversation with the former Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montek Singh Ahluwalia.
India is slated to become a $5 trillion economy by 2025, and the country's population is projected to surpass China in 2023. We are uniquely positioned to harness the potential of the skilled workforce, thereby fast-tracking the path towards becoming an economic superpower. In the third part of the Delhi Springboard series, we focus on India's growth trajectory, discuss policy making and the impact of climate change with Surjit Bhalla, former Executive Director of IMF, and Montek Singh Ahluwalia, former Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission.
What is the big story? We are today celebrating the Amrit Kal. We're talking about the opportunities of the Amrit Kal. Sir, my first question to you, if you could kickstart this evening by talking about the big story on the economy, what would that be?
Yeah. Well, let me start with a factual point that in 1991, when India launched its first set of reforms, I wrote that this is India's decade. In 2001, I repeated that same in articles that this is India's decade. In 2011, I did the same.
And just a few days ago, I noticed a tweet you put out saying India's time is now. Is it finally
and that
now?
is, and you know, so people say, look, what about China, this, that? When was India's decade? One of the interesting facts about growth, Indian growth, is that we are second only to China. And China had an exceptionally high growth rate for the last 30 years. And, you know, we didn't do so badly. So I wasn't that far wrong. But now is the time when I think it is India's decade. It is India's next 20, 30 years. And globally, whether you look at geopolitics, whether you look at economics, whether you look at demography, all things are coming together to finally make the forecast right, not just for one decade, but for the next 3 decades.
Could you talk about perhaps what really needs to be done when it comes to ensuring that our demographic dividend, we still continue holding on to that and continue holding on to that opportunity?
Yeah, you see, first, the demographic dividend is a phrase often used and more often misused. The demographic dividend has to do with not just the fact that you have a young labor force, which we do, but also now that you have a much more educated labor force than you did. Not only before, but even in a comparative sense now. Now, that's not to say that there are no problems. As everybody has noted, there are problems in terms of education quality. And I think it is important that policymakers be cognizant of the fact that there is something to be said about improving the education quality. There's something to be said about improving data availability so that the policymakers can make more educated decisions. You know, comparing India of today and any other developing country of today with that in the past you didn't have that much information. Most of the policymakers were operating in the dark because you didn't have information. Now, with the startups, with the education, with computerization, you know, what is lacking? Why can't and why won't is a question we should all ask. Why can't and why won't policy making be a lot more informed and therefore a lot more accurate in terms of delivering the goods to the people?
Since you're talking about digital and tech, one of the world's largest technology companies, the CEO, has argued that it's good perhaps the digital and tech also takes away the low-end white-collar jobs. You know, everyone is talking of mechanization, digital tech, etc. But so, you know, as far as probably blue-collar jobs are concerned, but it's now being argued that it needs to disrupt every section of the labor market. Would you say, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think the government should not be in the business of, okay, we've got this computerization going on, fintech going on, what will it do to jobs? I think you obviously should be concerned about jobs, but jobs are more concerned with broader environment that the government provides for economic growth. Deregulation will provide more jobs than anything will be lost by computerization. So, you know, there are lots of opportunities there for jobs, and it is not technology that takes away jobs. It is bad policy that takes away jobs.
Do you feel perhaps that the demand from the rural economy is going to be enough to really continue supporting India on its growth journey?
Unfortunately, fortunately, I have a completely contrarian or different view. It may not be contrarian to a lot of the entrepreneurs over here. I think the major growth in India is going to come from the rural areas, not from the urban areas. I mean, the whole story, where is the rapid catch-up taking place? Maybe not as rapid as we would like, but whether I look at cricket, or I look at consumer products, or I look at beauty care products, I don't know what product is not more conducive and more facilitating rural consumption growth, rural income growth. And I'll give you one statistic, which every study that has been done, and there are a few of them, over what has happened to inequality in India over the last 10, 15 years, shows that inequality has come down. Yet, you know, for political reasons or knee-jerk responses, you know, inequality has gone up is the popular. So my emphasis always has been, let's look at the data. And the data will show me whether what is happening or not. And the data on the rural economy is extremely positive relative to the expectations or the belief of people. It may not be as good as you and I would like it to be, but then the reality is that basically look at the rural economy where it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and where it is now, and you will see that that has been a big facilitator of overall growth.
Hello, sir. I am Yogesh Chansoria, and I am representing Celsius Technologies. So my question from the economy perspective, we are definitely marching ahead towards $5 trillion very, very soon. But like, do we have the mitigation plans? Because like market is very volatile.
There are sectors, some firms go up, valuation goes up, valuation goes down, prices goes in the obvious manner, and the markets correct themselves. We've seen this happen all the time. And so for me, I think that's actually a very normal. If one were to look at the volatility over the last several years, it's probably, I haven't looked at the exact numbers, gone down, not up. So as markets become more and more perfect, quote unquote, and by markets I really mean world markets, because you know, one of the things I want to emphasize, which is not given enough credit for, in India in particular, you know, we are part of a global world now. So individual or Indian circumstances, domestic circumstances, or domestic events have a much lower impact on anything that we want, whether we want to export, whether we want to import, the price of exports, the price of securities. These are all determined in the global marketplace. And so is it for every other country.
How authentic are the data points, be it a job market, be it the inflation point? How authentic is the data points?
Look, I'll give you just one example of this private data on the job market. It shows that female labor force participation rate in India is something like 8%. That is 8 out of every 100 eligible women in that age group, 15 to 64, are working. I look around. If I look in finance, if I look in journalism, if I look practically anywhere, I see, look at teaching, whatever it is, there are a lot more women now in the labor force working than ever before. So a lot of this has to do with definitions, and then when you compare with other countries, we, the government, does not supply the data on a timely basis. And if I believe in globalization, as I do, data is the new oil. If data is the new oil, it is very, and what I just answered to you earlier, that basically the governments can become a lot more effective in their delivery, in their policies, if they have adequate data.
Absolutely.
And we don't have. So I think we have a problem in that the private data source is problematical, and we have a bigger problem that the government data source is not working efficiently.
On that note, thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. Like we started discussing, the question of what is really going to drive the economy forward is a big question. We've attempted to answer it in many parts today. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take a quick break. On that note, on the other side, we'll continue our conversations here on IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow's Springboard. Welcome back. You're with us here on IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow's Springboard. Maybe we dive right in and answer the difficult questions. And first and foremost, this is also a question that I posed to Mr. Surjit Bhalla, and I asked him, we're now the most populous country in the world. Are demographic, asset, or challenge? And what policies do you think really need to be framed to ensure that we're able to ensure that this population of ours is an asset? Because at the end of the day, we're also talking about mass underemployment. We're not just talking about unemployment.
Well, I thought he gave quite a good answer when he said, look, population is always an asset if it's actually skilled. So this is a huge issue. I mean, how skilled is our population? And secondly, are we doing enough to, as it were, make it appropriate for the kind of challenges we're going to face? I mean, as we talk of digitalization, which is a very major positive feature, do we have a labor force that can handle the kind of transformation that will involve? That's the real question. I mean, it's also the case that, population is an advantage, a skilled population is an advantage if the overall policies are conducive to the kind of growth that will use that population. And that brings you into a whole list of other things. All of that has to happen. So merely talking about demographic dividend as if we are going to say, well, look, we can't set right everything else, but don't worry, we have a demographic dividend, that would be a mistake. Sure. So really the question is, are we going to create the conditions in which we could benefit from having the youngest population at a time when most other societies are aging, even China. So in that sense, we have, it's a unique situation.
Most Asian economies definitely are aging, and that definitely puts India in its bright spot. We were talking about demographic dividend. Another term that we're hearing of late is population development. You said skilling, of course. That will go a long way towards ensuring that our population is an asset. But what else to ensure that we're capitalizing on Amrit Kal do you think we should do by way of policy?
Well, I mean, that boils down to what is the GDP growth target that you have in mind? I mean, if the GDP growth target is, let's say, just 4.5% or 5%, you'll still reach $5 trillion at some time, okay? So I think this whole focusing on a GDP target distracts attention from what's the growth rate we're aiming at, okay? Now, to my mind, I think we should be aiming at something 7 plus. People might say 8, 9, whatever. But I personally believe that given India's inherent strengths, given the scope of following sensible policies, we should be able to grow at 7+%, let's say over the next maybe 20 years, okay? An average. It'll begin a little higher, it'll then slow down. And I think if we do grow at 7+%, it is also important that the nature of the growth is such that it generates enough employment. It is possible to have a growth, very rapid growth, in which only a part of the economy is generating huge values, inequality is going up, and lots of other people are not really being brought into the production structure. So you need to do that also. Now that's a very long list of policies. It's not a silver bullet kind of situation. There's only one thing. If only you do that, all this will follow.
Just like the previous session, we will be opening this session as well up for questions from the audience, so please keep them ready. Before I come to that, I have another big picture question, another difficult one to answer, which is climate change. I was reading a recent opinion piece of yours where you said progress has started, policy making has started, but it's slow. We're talking in the backdrop of India's G20 presidency. What more? I know there's a lot to be done, but if you could pick a few that you want to highlight this evening.
No, I mean, you're going to hear all about the G20 presidency from the next speaker, Amitabh Kant, who can speak authoritatively on how India will take this up. But climate change is definitely extremely important for India, because all the scientific evidence we have suggests that if we are not able to achieve the global target, the 1.5%, 1.5 degree above pre-industrial levels is actually now regarded as non-achievable. They won't admit it in public, but if you ask any of the experts in private, they'll say that's not going to happen. But we could try to bring it below 2. So it's not as if if we don't do anything, we could end up with 2.8. So there's a lot of room for doing a lot. Then the issue is something happening? This is not just an issue for India. This is an issue for all countries. Because I think what's happened is that all countries now are subscribing to the fact that climate change is important and we must do something. And I think all countries have started to do something. We've certainly started to do something. But my guess is that all countries, and also India, we're not actually doing as much as we need to. Now, the point is, need to is something to be done over the next 10 or 20 years. Most people do not appreciate the fundamental structural change that will be needed if we are to manage climate change. It's not like the general kind of growth thing, a little bit more of this and a little bit more of this. I mean, look, the central thing on climate change is the energy transition. We have said that we want to increase the amount of renewable energy, solar and wind, which will come into the system, and quite a lot of progress has been made. But what we have to do is a lot more than what we've been doing. That's point number one. And point number two is that, if we are going to succeed in switching to renewable energy, it also means we must switch away from coal. So the question then is, and lots of people will ask this question, when are we going to be able to reduce the dependence on coal? Now, it won't be happening immediately. Everybody agrees it won't be happening immediately. But are we willing to say that, we really must start reducing our dependence on coal, let's say, by the end of the 2030s? At the moment, we're not in a position to say exactly what's going to happen on that front. And I think in medium-term planning, we need to spell out how much of a change do we want say by 2030 and then by 2040.
And we on the show have been doing a series of conversations really about the opportunities which are being presented thanks to the SDG goals and thanks to really more focus on the climate now. But we'll come back really to that and discuss some of those. This gentleman right in front, could we please have a mic here?
My name is Vishesh Soni, and I just continuing from where sir mentioned that we have a large population which is there and a population which may be a boon to all of us. But the question arises, where is the skilled labor?
Well, the larger issues of how we're going to absorb labor, they are medium-term issues. The issue of short-term, let's be clear. Either we are going to grow at 7% or not. If we are going to grow at 7%, then you shouldn't be talking of a recession. Certainly, if for the next quarter the thing slows down, yes, you'll have a problem. All the evidence we have on unemployment does seem to suggest that we've got back to the pre-pandemic level. Now, the trouble is, whenever you open this can of worms, and Surjit is the expert on this, the data vary, the data sources vary, interpretation varies. Most people agree that we have got back to sort of pre-pandemic level of unemployment, but there is a perception that the quality of the employment, which was there even earlier and which is there now, is really not satisfactory. And I think there's a valid point there. But the only solution to that is get the economy growing faster and make sure that it's the kind of growth that is conducive to absorbing labor. And, it shouldn't be the kind of growth where you take pride only in the growth of high technology, very capital-intensive sectors. They have a role. But you've got to look at what's happening in agriculture and, as you say, what's happening in MSMEs.
Here's a sneak peek as we're ending tonight's show. Thanks for watching.
It's very, very important that India achieves consistently high levels of growth. The only way to create jobs is to grow at high rates. India needs to aim much higher. You need to grow on manufacturing, you need to grow on services, you need to grow on agricultural productivity, all three of them.